Big news. The truth about why your soulmate was forced away from you has finally come out. My beloved child. The truth you were never supposed to hear has finally begun to surface, and it changes everything you thought you understood about why your soulmate disappeared from your life. For so long, their distance may have looked like a choice. Their silence may have felt like rejection. You may have wondered how someone who seemed to care so deeply could suddenly become colder, quieter, almost unreachable. But there was something happening behind that silence that you could not see. Someone close to your soulmate knew exactly how much you meant to them, and that person believed your connection had to end. Not because the feelings weren't real. Because those feelings were becoming too real to control. And now, after keeping quiet for far too long, someone who witnessed what happened has finally spoken. What they revealed explains a detail that never made sense before. Your soulmate didn't begin pulling away immediately after something happened between the two of you. The change came after a private conversation with someone they trusted. According to what has finally come out, that conversation wasn't gentle advice. Your soulmate was placed under intense emotional pressure and made to believe that staying connected to you would create consequences for people they cared about. They were reminded of responsibilities, family expectations, promises they had made, and problems that supposedly would become worse if they chose you. But there was another layer. Something was said about you that your soulmate believed at the time, and it wasn't completely true. Don't skip this, because that false information may be the real reason everything changed so suddenly. Your soulmate walked away believing distance would protect you from a situation you didn't even know existed. But here's where the story turns. Your soulmate recently discovered that part of what they were told had been deliberately exaggerated. A detail was left out. Another was twisted. And when they finally compared what they had been told with what actually happened, they realized something devastating. They had sacrificed your connection based on a version of the truth designed to frighten them into leaving. That realization didn't bring relief. It brought anger, regret, and one terrifying question: how do you return to someone after allowing other people to decide the fate of your relationship? Yet instead of staying silent again, your soulmate has apparently made a decision. They want to confront the person who pressured them, but before they do, there is one missing piece they need confirmed. And the person who can confirm it knows something about the day your soulmate was forced away from you that even your soulmate has never heard. That missing piece came from someone who had been in the background from the beginning. Someone who heard more than anyone realized and stayed silent because they were afraid of becoming involved. But recently, they could no longer carry what they knew. They reached out to your soulmate with a simple message: there is something about that day you deserve to know. Your soulmate almost ignored it. Then the person mentioned one specific detail from the private conversation that nobody outside that room should have known. Suddenly, everything became real. Your soulmate agreed to hear them out, expecting perhaps another explanation or excuse. Instead, they were told that the pressure to leave you had started much earlier than they believed. Someone had been quietly watching your connection grow, noticing how your soulmate changed around you, and worrying that eventually you would become the person your soulmate chose above everyone else's expectations. What happened next was even harder to accept. The witness explained that your soulmate had been presented with what looked like convincing information about you. Certain conversations had supposedly taken place. Certain intentions had supposedly been revealed. Your soulmate was led to believe you were preparing to move forward without them and that holding on to you would only create more pain. But there was a problem. The information had passed through someone with a reason to keep the two of you apart. Pieces of truth had been mixed with assumptions until the story sounded believable. And because your soulmate was already emotionally overwhelmed, they didn't question it enough. Instead, they did what they were pressured to do: they stepped away. They became distant when they wanted to come closer. They stayed silent when everything inside them wanted to explain. And all this time, you were left trying to understand a goodbye that never matched the connection you had experienced. Then the witness revealed something your soulmate wasn't prepared for. On the very day they decided to distance themselves from you, they had apparently changed their mind once already. For a brief moment, your soulmate had refused to go through with it. They wanted to contact you, tell you everything, and allow you to decide whether the situation was worth facing together. But before they could reach you, another conversation happened. And this one contained the statement that finally broke their resistance. Stay till the end, because this is where the hidden story begins turning into something much bigger. Your soulmate now knows that somebody intentionally used their deepest fear against them. But the witness remembers the exact words that were spoken that day, and when your soulmate heard those words again, they immediately realized who had been behind the separation all along. The name your soulmate finally connected to those words was not the one they had expected. It was someone they had trusted enough to believe without demanding proof, someone who understood exactly which fear would make them hesitate when it came to you. The witness explained that this person never directly said, "Leave them." They were far more careful than that. Instead, they planted questions. What if you eventually became tired of waiting? What if choosing you created a permanent conflict with the people your soulmate felt responsible for? What if you discovered everything happening behind the scenes and decided the relationship was too complicated? Slowly, those questions became fear, and fear began sounding like certainty. Your soulmate wasn't forced away with one dramatic command. They were cornered emotionally until walking away from you seemed like the only decision that wouldn't hurt everyone around them. But there was one sentence your soulmate remembered immediately. On that final day, they had been told that you supposedly wanted them to stop contacting you because you were ready to move on. That was the statement that destroyed their courage. They believed reaching out might disrespect your wishes, so they swallowed everything they wanted to say and disappeared behind silence. Now the witness has revealed something crucial. Nobody had actually heard those words directly from you. The message had been passed from one person to another, changed along the way, and eventually presented to your soulmate as though it came straight from you. Suddenly, years of confusion began rearranging themselves in their mind. Your soulmate started remembering moments when your actions didn't match what they had been told. The way you still seemed emotionally present. The unanswered questions between you. The feeling that neither of you had truly chosen the ending. And then came the detail that made your soulmate stop speaking completely. The witness admitted there had been another message, one you were supposed to receive. Your soulmate had written it shortly before everything fell apart. It wasn't a goodbye. It was an explanation. They had tried to tell you about the pressure surrounding them, the fear they were carrying, and why they were struggling to make a decision. Most importantly, they had made one thing unmistakably clear. They did not want to lose you. But according to the witness, that message never reached you. Someone made sure it didn't. And now your soulmate wants to know exactly what happened to it, because if that message was deliberately kept from you, then the separation wasn't simply caused by misunderstanding. Someone actively interfered at the precise moment when the truth could have saved your connection. And the witness knows where that missing message went. The witness finally explained what happened to that message, and your soulmate could barely process it. It had never disappeared by accident. Before it could reach you, someone close to the situation became aware of it and convinced your soulmate that sending it would only make everything worse. They said you had already made your decision. They insisted that explaining the pressure would sound like an excuse and would only reopen a wound you supposedly wanted closed. Your soulmate hesitated. They read the message again and again, sitting with their finger near the send button, wanting desperately to ignore everyone and choose honesty. But then came another warning: if they contacted you, certain private problems surrounding the family could become exposed. That was enough to stop them. Your soulmate saved the message instead of sending it, believing there would eventually be a safer moment to tell you everything. That safer moment never came. What your soulmate didn't know was that the person advising them had already helped create the very misunderstanding they were using as proof that you wanted distance. That realization changed the entire story. The witness described how carefully everything had been arranged, not through some dramatic scheme, but through small believable distortions. A sentence repeated differently. A question presented as a decision. Silence interpreted as rejection. Every time your soulmate considered contacting you, someone reminded them of another reason not to. Meanwhile, you were receiving no explanation, so naturally your own silence grew heavier. Two people were waiting for reassurance from each other while someone between them kept interpreting that silence in the worst possible way. And when your soulmate finally understood this, they didn't just feel angry. They felt devastated by how close the two of you may have been to discovering the truth much earlier. Then something unexpected happened. Your soulmate went looking for that unsent message. They weren't sure it still existed after all this time, but they remembered where they had saved certain private words they could never bring themselves to delete. And there it was. The original message. Untouched. Dated from the exact period when everything changed between you. Reading it again brought back emotions they had spent years trying to bury, because the person who wrote those words wasn't someone trying to escape you. It was someone desperately trying to find a way back to you. But one line near the end caught their attention now in a completely different way. Your soulmate had mentioned a promise they had been pressured to make, a promise they never explained to you. And suddenly the witness became uncomfortable, because that promise connects directly to the real reason someone was so determined to keep your soulmate away from you. That promise had been made during one of the most vulnerable periods of your soulmate's life, long before you understood how much pressure surrounded them. Someone in their family had helped them through a difficult situation, and your soulmate felt permanently indebted to that person. Later, when your connection became serious, that old debt was quietly brought back into the conversation. Your soulmate was reminded of everything that had been done for them and then asked for something in return. Don't make a decision that could divide the family. At first, your soulmate never imagined that request meant losing you. But gradually the meaning became impossible to ignore. Choosing you was being presented as betrayal. Staying close to you supposedly meant breaking a promise. And because your soulmate carried enormous guilt about disappointing the person who once helped them, they became trapped between what their heart wanted and what they believed they owed. But the witness revealed that the promise itself had been manipulated. Your soulmate had never promised to give up the person they loved. They had promised to be responsible, to protect certain people from unnecessary conflict, and to think carefully before making major decisions. Someone later stretched those words until they meant something completely different. Don't skip this, because your soulmate has now remembered exactly how that happened. Whenever they defended you, the conversation was redirected toward loyalty. Whenever they said you deserved the truth, they were told that telling you everything would create chaos. Whenever they threatened to ignore the pressure and contact you anyway, someone brought up that old promise and asked, "After everything we did for you, is this how you repay us?" Your soulmate wasn't simply choosing between two relationships. They were being made to believe that loving you revealed something selfish about their character. Then your soulmate asked the witness the question that had been building inside them since the conversation began. Why were they so afraid of me choosing this person? The witness went quiet. That silence immediately told your soulmate there was still more. Eventually, the answer came, but only partially. Apparently, the person applying the pressure knew that if your soulmate built a future with you, something else would change, something involving a decision that had already been made about your soulmate's future without their full knowledge. Suddenly, the interference wasn't only about family approval or emotional control. There was another reason they needed your soulmate to remain on the path that had been prepared for them. And according to the witness, you represented the one influence powerful enough to make your soulmate question that entire future. But before explaining exactly what had been planned, the witness revealed one chilling detail: another person had been waiting for your soulmate to walk away from you. That other person had not appeared after your separation by coincidence. They had already been known to the family, and certain people believed they represented a safer, more predictable future for your soulmate. There had been quiet conversations about introductions, expectations, and what life was supposed to look like long before your soulmate understood what was happening. Nobody could simply order them to choose someone else, so the pressure took another form. First, your connection with them had to become uncertain. Then your soulmate had to believe that staying with you would cost too much emotionally. Only after enough distance existed could another possibility be placed in front of them. But the witness insisted on one important detail: your soulmate never felt for that person what they felt for you. In fact, every comparison seemed to make your absence more painful, because the connection they were being encouraged to accept only reminded them of what they had been forced to leave behind. That realization explained something else your soulmate had never understood. After stepping away from you, they expected the pressure around them to disappear. Instead, it increased. Suddenly people wanted answers about their future. They were encouraged to move forward unusually quickly. Whenever your name came up, the subject was changed. Whenever your soulmate admitted they still thought about you, someone treated those feelings like a temporary weakness that would eventually pass. But they didn't pass. Your soulmate began noticing that the more others tried to erase you from the conversation, the more clearly they remembered you. Small details returned without warning. The way you understood what they meant before they finished speaking, the calm they felt around you, and especially the final moments before everything became confusing. Something huge is waiting for you here, because those memories eventually made your soulmate question the story they had accepted. And that questioning led them to something nobody expected. Your soulmate began privately comparing dates, conversations, and messages from the weeks surrounding your separation. One timeline didn't fit. A warning they had supposedly received about you had been delivered before the event that was said to have caused it. That meant someone had been preparing your soulmate to distrust the connection before there was even a reason to do so. When they showed this contradiction to the witness finally stopped protecting the remaining secret. They admitted there had been a private family conversation before your soulmate was pushed away. A conversation your soulmate was deliberately excluded from. Your name was discussed. Your future with them was discussed. And one person apparently said something so revealing that the witness remembered it word for word. Your soulmate demanded to know exactly what was said. But when the witness finally repeated that sentence, your soulmate realized the separation had been planned much earlier than anyone had admitted. The sentence was painfully simple. If they stay together much longer, we won't be able to change their mind. Your soulmate felt their stomach drop when they heard it. Those words meant the people involved weren't reacting to some sudden problem between the two of you. They had already recognized that your connection was becoming stronger, and they feared that once your soulmate fully committed to you, outside pressure would stop working. The witness explained that during that private conversation, someone argued that your soulmate was becoming more independent because of you. They were questioning expectations they had accepted for years. They were talking differently about their future. And most importantly, they had started making decisions based on what genuinely made them happy instead of what would keep everyone else comfortable. You had never asked them to rebel against anyone. But simply being loved by you had shown them that another kind of life was possible. That was why the interference became urgent. Your soulmate finally understood why everything happened so quickly near the end. The strange warnings. The emotional conversations. The sudden claims about what you supposedly wanted. The constant insistence that waiting would only make things harder. They weren't being given time to think because time was exactly what the people applying pressure couldn't afford. If your soulmate had spoken openly with you, the contradictions might have collapsed immediately. If the two of you had compared what each person had been told, someone would have been exposed. So distance had to happen first, and explanations could come later, after enough silence made reconciliation feel impossible. But there was one thing nobody predicted. Your soulmate never emotionally accepted the ending. They obeyed the pressure, yes. They disappeared. They tried to convince themselves it was necessary. Yet somewhere inside, they continued waiting for the truth to make sense. Now it finally does, but that understanding has created a decision far more serious than the witness expected. Your soulmate no longer wants another second-hand explanation. They want to hear the truth directly from the person who led that private family conversation. And this time, guilt isn't going to silence them. They have already prepared the questions. Who first claimed you wanted distance? Who decided your relationship was a threat? Why was another person being positioned as their future before you were even gone? And who stopped the truth from reaching you when there was still time to save everything? But before your soulmate could confront anyone, the witness gave them one final warning. There is a reason that person has avoided discussing you for so long. They are holding something your soulmate doesn't know exists, something connected to you from before the separation. And if your soulmate sees it, the person who controlled the story all these years may no longer be able to deny what they did. What they were holding was not another rumor or someone else's version of events. It was something far harder to explain away, an old written note connected directly to the weeks before your soulmate disappeared from your life. The witness had seen it once and remembered enough to know that it contradicted the story your soulmate had been given. According to that note, you had never clearly rejected your soulmate. In fact, the words surrounding your name suggested the opposite. That there was still an opportunity for the two of you to speak honestly before any permanent decision was made. Your soulmate immediately asked why they had never seen it. The witness couldn't answer that without exposing someone completely. For years, your soulmate had believed there had been nothing left to fight for. Now they were discovering that evidence pointing toward another possibility had existed all along. Your soulmate didn't wait. They confronted the person who had kept control of the story, but something surprising happened before the first real question was even finished. That person became defensive immediately. They insisted everything had been done to protect your soulmate from making a decision they would regret. But your soulmate noticed something different this time. Nobody was actually answering the questions. Why had they been told you wanted distance? Why had the unsent message been discouraged? Why had another future been discussed before your connection was even over? Each time your soulmate pushed closer to the truth, the explanation changed slightly. First it was about family stability. Then timing. Then responsibility. Finally, your soulmate placed the timeline in front of them and pointed to the contradiction they could no longer dismiss. The room went quiet. Stay till the end, because what followed was the first genuine admission your soulmate had heard. The person finally confessed that they had been afraid, not of you personally, but of what your soulmate might choose if they knew the full truth. They admitted believing that your relationship would pull your soulmate toward a life nobody else had planned for them. They thought separating you early would prevent a larger conflict later. But when your soulmate asked whether the message about you wanting distance had been true, there was another long silence. Then came the answer, not exactly. Those two words changed everything. Your soulmate realized that the most painful decision of their life had been influenced by something presented as certainty when it had actually been an assumption twisted into fact. Yet before your soulmate could demand the rest, the person revealed there was still one thing they had never admitted to anyone. After your soulmate walked away, you apparently made one final attempt to reach them. And someone else saw it before your soulmate ever knew it existed. Your soulmate froze when they heard that you had tried one final time. For years, they had carried the belief that your silence after the separation confirmed everything they had been told. They thought you had accepted the ending, perhaps even wanted it. But now they were hearing that there had been an attempt from you, one that never reached them. The person finally admitted that your message arrived during the exact period when everyone was pushing your soulmate to move forward. It wasn't angry. It wasn't desperate. It simply asked for clarity. You wanted to understand why everything had changed without an honest conversation. And there was one line in that message that made the people around your soulmate nervous. You said that if the decision truly belonged to your soulmate, you would respect it. But you needed to hear that decision directly from them. That sentence threatened the entire version of events they had created. If your soulmate had seen your message, they would have realized immediately that you had never demanded distance. They might have contacted you. The two of you might have compared stories. And every contradiction could have surfaced before the separation became permanent. So someone made a choice on your soulmate's behalf. They decided your message would only confuse them and kept it from reaching them. Hearing this, your soulmate stopped defending the people involved. Something inside them shifted. The guilt they had carried for disappointing everyone suddenly looked different, because those same people had denied them the opportunity to make an informed choice. Your soulmate asked one question: where is that message now? Nobody answered immediately. Then the witness quietly revealed that a copy might still exist. That possibility changed your soulmate's next move completely. They no longer wanted arguments or apologies based on memory. They wanted to see your actual words. And when the old message was finally located, there was something in it even the witness hadn't remembered. Near the end, you had referred to a specific moment between you and your soulmate. A private conversation in which your soulmate had apparently made you a promise about the future. Nobody else should have understood what that reference meant. But the person who intercepted the message reacted to it immediately, almost as though they already knew about that promise. Your soulmate noticed. And suddenly another question became impossible to ignore. How had someone else learned the details of a conversation that was supposed to belong only to the two of you? The answer points to something that happened before the separation, and it may explain how the interference began in the first place. Your soulmate remembered that private promise with startling clarity. It had been made during a quiet conversation when neither of you was talking about leaving. You had spoken about what might happen if outside pressure ever became too heavy, and your soulmate had promised one thing: before making any permanent decision, they would come directly to you. No assumptions. No messages passed through other people. No disappearing without an explanation. That promise was exactly why your final attempt to reach them mattered so much. You were giving them the opportunity to keep their word. But somehow, before your message ever arrived, someone already knew that direct communication between the two of you was the one thing that could ruin everything they were trying to accomplish. Your soulmate began remembering little moments they had dismissed. Questions about your conversations, unusual interest in your plans, someone casually asking what the two of you had discussed after spending time together. Then one memory returned that changed the direction of the confrontation. Shortly before your soulmate pulled away, they had left a personal conversation open where someone close to them could have seen part of it. At the time, it seemed harmless. Nothing immediately happened. But the timing now felt impossible to ignore. Within days, the pressure became more specific. People suddenly knew which arguments would affect your soulmate most. They knew your connection was becoming serious. They even seemed aware that your soulmate had promised to speak with you before making any final choice. That meant the separation may not have been built only on assumptions. Someone had possibly learned enough about the private bond between you to understand exactly where it was strongest, and then worked around that strength. Your soulmate didn't need another emotional explanation anymore. They needed to know who had access, who repeated what they saw, and who turned private information into pressure. When confronted with that timeline, the person who had been defending the separation finally stopped denying everything. They admitted that certain private details had been discussed within the family because people were worried your soulmate was preparing to make a major commitment to you. But then they said something unexpected. The original intention, according to them, had not been to separate you permanently. They claimed they only wanted to delay the relationship until another situation was resolved. The permanent distance happened because someone else took the plan further than anyone had agreed. Your soulmate immediately asked who. The answer didn't come. Instead, the person looked toward the witness as though there was a name both of them had avoided saying from the beginning. And that reaction told your soulmate enough. There was another person behind the final push, the person who transformed temporary pressure into a complete separation. And your soulmate has just realized they spoke to that person immediately before walking away from you. That final conversation suddenly returned to your soulmate in fragments they had spent years trying not to revisit. The person had sounded calm, almost sympathetic, which was exactly why their words carried so much weight. They didn't attack you. They didn't demand an ending. Instead, they told your soulmate that sometimes loving someone meant knowing when to release them. Then they repeated the claim that you were already preparing to move forward without them. At the time, your soulmate heard compassion in those words. Now they heard something completely different. They remembered how strangely certain this person had been about your feelings, even though they had never spoken to you directly. And when your soulmate asked the witness whether this was the same person who had known about the private promise between you, the witness lowered their eyes. That reaction was the answer before a single word was spoken. The truth became even more unsettling when the witness explained why this person had become so involved. They had their own reason for wanting your soulmate to follow the future everyone else had prepared. If your soulmate chose you, an arrangement involving family expectations, responsibilities, and another relationship possibility would collapse. This person had spent months helping keep that arrangement together, and your connection threatened to undo it almost overnight. So when others merely wanted your soulmate to slow down, this person pushed harder. They repeated assumptions as facts. They encouraged silence. And when your final message arrived asking to hear the decision directly from your soulmate, they argued that showing it would only reopen everything. Your soulmate finally understood the difference. Several people had applied pressure, but one person had made sure you never received the honest conversation you deserved. Then came the question nobody in the room wanted to answer. Your soulmate asked whether that person had ever contacted you directly. The witness hesitated for so long that your soulmate immediately knew there was more. Eventually, they admitted hearing about one brief interaction, something that happened without your soulmate's knowledge after the separation had already begun. The details were unclear, but apparently you may have been given the impression that your soulmate had personally requested complete distance. If that happened, then both of you were being told almost identical lies from opposite directions. Your soulmate believed you wanted them gone, while you were led to believe they wanted you gone. But there is still one piece that could prove exactly what happened. The witness remembers that the person who contacted you later described your response to someone else, and those words were written down. Your soulmate is about to see that record, and what you supposedly said could expose the final lie that kept both of you apart. When your soulmate finally saw that old record, one sentence stood out immediately: "They didn't ask me to stay away, they asked whether this was truly what you wanted." Your soulmate read it twice. Then again. Because those words destroyed the last excuse anyone could use to defend what happened. You hadn't closed the door. You hadn't rejected them. Even after being told that your soulmate wanted complete distance, you were still searching for confirmation. You wanted to hear the truth from the one person whose decision actually mattered. But the response you received had apparently been framed as final. Yes, this was what your soulmate wanted. Except your soulmate had never said that. They had been sitting somewhere else at that exact time believing the opposite, that you were the one asking to be left alone. Two people still wanted answers, while someone between them was answering on behalf of both. Your soulmate's reaction wasn't loud. That surprised everyone. They simply became very still, because anger was no longer the strongest emotion in the room. Grief was. They began imagining how different everything might have been if one honest conversation had happened. One call. One message delivered without interference. One moment where neither of you relied on somebody else's interpretation. But then your soulmate noticed something important in the record: a date. The interaction with you had happened after your soulmate had supposedly been told you wanted no further contact. That meant whoever delivered the original claim already knew it wasn't certain. And when you later questioned whether the separation was truly your soulmate's choice, that person had an opportunity to correct the misunderstanding. They didn't. They reinforced it. This wasn't simply bad advice anymore. Someone had consciously protected a false story after discovering that you still wanted the truth. And that discovery forced the first complete confession. The person at the center of the interference finally admitted they had believed your soulmate would eventually thank them. They thought time would weaken the connection, another future would take its place, and both of you would move on without ever comparing what happened. But that never happened. Your soulmate never stopped wondering about you. And apparently, the person who interfered noticed that too. Years later, they realized the separation hadn't erased the bond. It had only buried unanswered questions beneath it. That's why the truth remained hidden for so long. But there is one final secret they are still resisting. Your soulmate asked what happened after your last attempt to reach them, and the answer revealed that you weren't the only one who tried again. Your soulmate also made one last move toward you after believing everything was over, and someone stopped that attempt before you ever knew it happened. That final move from your soulmate happened late one night, after days of pretending they had accepted the separation. They had tried following everyone's advice. They had stayed quiet. They had told themselves that if you truly wanted distance, they had to respect it. But something inside them refused to believe the story completely. So they wrote to you again, this time without explanations, without mentioning the family, without trying to defend what had happened. The message contained one simple request: before we let this end, can we speak directly? Your soulmate remembered writing those words, but for years they believed they had lost the courage to send them. Now the truth is different. The message was sent. Someone with access to the situation saw what was happening and intervened before you could ever respond. That discovery left your soulmate staring at the evidence, realizing there had actually been one last doorway back to you. What happened to that message exposed just how determined the interference had become. The person responsible admitted they believed another conversation between you would undo everything. By then, too many people had become invested in keeping your soulmate on the future path they preferred. So your soulmate was told there had been no response from you. Meanwhile, you were left with the impression that the silence from their side was intentional. The cruelty of the misunderstanding was almost impossible for your soulmate to process. Both of you had reached toward each other. Both attempts had been blocked by fear, assumptions, and decisions made by people who believed they knew what was best. And then enough time passed that each of you began treating the other's silence as an answer. Your soulmate now understands that the ending they spent years grieving was never truly chosen by either of you. But the most important revelation came when your soulmate asked why the truth was finally being admitted now. The answer had nothing to do with guilt suddenly appearing. Something had changed. The future everyone once tried to protect had already fallen apart on its own. The arrangement they believed was worth separating you for never became what they expected. The responsibilities they used to frighten your soulmate changed. The reasons for keeping you apart slowly disappeared. Yet nobody had the courage to admit what they had done. Until now. And hearing that has forced your soulmate to confront one final decision, whether knowing the truth is enough, or whether they must finally do what they were prevented from doing all those years ago and speak directly to you. They have already chosen. But before making that move, your soulmate discovered one last hidden detail about your final message, and it contains something they never knew you were willing to do for them. The hidden detail was buried near the end of your final message, in words your soulmate had never been allowed to read. You had made it clear that you weren't asking them to fight everyone, abandon their responsibilities, or choose you at the expense of people they loved. You were willing to be patient. You were willing to understand the pressure they were under. You had even offered to step back temporarily if that was what they genuinely needed, but only if the decision came honestly from them. That shattered one of the biggest fears your soulmate had carried. They had been told that choosing you meant choosing conflict, that you would never understand their complicated responsibilities, and that eventually you would force them to decide between love and family. Yet your own words proved you had been offering the exact opposite. You weren't demanding a choice. You were asking for honesty. For the first time, your soulmate could see the entire story without someone else's interpretation standing between you. You had reached out. They had reached out. You had asked for clarity. They had wanted one final conversation. Neither of you had truly closed the door, yet both of you had been made to believe the other person had done exactly that. The realization changed something inside your soulmate. For years, they had blamed themselves for not being stronger, blamed circumstances for making the relationship impossible, and sometimes even blamed you because believing you had moved on was easier than questioning everyone they trusted. Now that illusion is gone. They know why they were forced away. They know who applied the pressure, who distorted your intentions, and who kept two final attempts at communication from bringing you back together. But knowing the true